This cancellation segment today exists mainly so that I can justify 3.5 hours that I wasted this weekend. But it also, I hope, serves as a warning that will save many of you from suffering the same fate. There's also a lesson to be learned here, I think, or relearned about Hollywood and movie critics and the kinds of films that earn all the praise and accolades these days. So my wife and I just watched a critically acclaimed new film called The Brutalist. And this is a movie that, when the Oscars roll around in a couple of weeks, is likely set to take home several awards. It has been nominated for 10 Academy Awards, including Best Picture. It already took home the Golden Globes for Best Drama, Best Director, and Best Actor, along with a slate of other smaller awards throughout this award season. Critics have hailed the film as a work of genius, a masterpiece. Its critics' score on Rotten Tomatoes sits at 93%. And if you scroll down the pull quotes on the Rotten Tomatoes website, you'll find critics saying stuff like, quote, "It is quite easily one of the greatest films of the 21st century," and, quote, "a monumental work of cinema," and, quote, "it's not a film to devour, but to be devoured by. There's such a weight to it that it creates its own field of gravity." Now, these are ringing endorsements. Well, the first two quotes are. I'm not exactly sure what the hell the third one is even supposed to be trying to say, but this is what happens when film critics are really taken by a film. They get so caught up in the experience that they start babbling incoherently. All told, suffice it to say, this film is a critical darling. And it's not just the critics singing its praises. The audience score on Rotten Tomatoes is a very respectable 80%. And I have personally heard from multiple people that it's a good film, even a great film. And it was this last piece, the endorsements of actual humans, as opposed to movie critics, that convinced me to sit down with my wife and watch this thing. And that is a decision that I very much regret. I am sad to report that The Brutalist is not good. It is very bad. In fact, it is, all told, one of the most unpleasant film experiences I have ever had. Indeed, I find it very hard to believe that most of the people who claim to like this film actually did like it. When someone tells me, "Oh, I like the film," I think you're lying. I think you're a liar. I'm calling you a liar. I don't believe you liked it. Because every year, it seems, there is one especially artsy and self-indulgent film that everybody pretends to like because they think they're supposed to. You know, they're convinced that the film is some sort of IQ test and the score is pass-fail, and the way to pass it, they think, is to think the movie is a masterpiece. Even if, in reality, they spend at least half the runtime praying for the damn thing to be over. You know, the movie becomes a kind of psyop that critics run on the public, and then the public runs on itself. Everyone goes around speaking in hushed and reverent tones about the monumental artistic achievement of a film that almost all of them actually hated. Every year gives us at least one of those kinds of movies, and The Brutalist is this year's addition to that pantheon of films that people hate but pretend to like. And I'm here to tell you, do not fall for the psyop. Do not waste your time on this movie. And if you don't believe me, I will describe the film to you, and there will be spoilers. This is your warning. If you don't want the plot spoiled, don't listen to this review. Although the good news is that the plot really can't be spoiled because there isn't much of a plot to spoil. The Brutalist is a slow, meandering slog to nowhere. It is a long, dreary, monotonous journey into the void. And when I say long, I mean long. I mean 3.5 hours long. You could watch 2.5 other movies in the time it takes to watch this one movie. There is no valid excuse for a movie to be 3.5 hours long. Anyone who's ever made a film knows that editing is a crucial process of the filmmaking process. Okay, you also know that if you're not getting rid of scenes you like when you're editing, not just scenes you don't like, but even some of the moments you do like, then you're not editing it enough. Editing and cutting down a film should hurt. It should be painful. And if it doesn't hurt, you have not cut nearly enough from the film. And it's clear that the director, Brady Corbett, took apparently very much the opposite approach. So he put the film together, came up with his V1, looked at it, and said, "This is absolutely perfect. We will cut not one single thing. In fact, let's add some more random stuff. The movie's only 3 hours long. Let's add about 15 more shots of people staring forlorn into the distance. Oh, and we already have 9 scenes of the protagonist shooting heroin. Let's add 5 or 6 more. Because, you know, you can never have too much heroin in a movie, I say." That was apparently the conversation that happened in the editing bay while this film was being put together. And the end product is an endurance test that the vast majority of the audience will probably fail. So what is the movie about? Well, The Brutalist is a story of a fictional Hungarian Jewish architect named Laszlo Toth, played by Adrian Brody, who flees war-torn Europe and immigrates to the United States, where he is eventually reunited with his now disabled wife and niece. They're initially split up, and then they reunite a little bit later in the film. And he faces a lot of hardship. He befriends a homeless black man, one of the only virtuous characters in the whole film, of course, develops a heroin addiction, and is eventually taken in by a wealthy American business magnate played by Guy Pearce. And Pearce's character, Harrison Van Buren, enlists Toth to build a giant community center in Pennsylvania. Which, as far, if you can call that a plot, that's basically the plot of the film. Now, the theme of this movie is that immigrants have a hard time in America and are underappreciated and often abused. And this theme, which is not exactly a unique or revolutionary theme, but it's a theme that like approximately 90% of all Oscar bait movies explore. And the theme is explored in relatively subtle ways for the first about half of the film. In fact, if the movie had only consisted of its first half, if it had ended around its midpoint, it might have been a decent, though not great film. But unfortunately, it continues. And then it continues, and it continues, and it continues. And finally, just in case the audience has not quite gotten the message that Americans are cruel to immigrants, there's a scene towards the end where, again, spoiler, Van Buren finds an intoxicated Toth laying in a back alley and proceeds to rape him while telling him how disgusting and useless he is. Yes, the white Christian American businessman makes anti-immigrant comments while raping the Jewish immigrant in a back alley. And that's an actual scene in this movie, all right? And Toth, for some reason, goes back to work for Van Buren even after this episode. But now he's an even more morose character, understandably. And this leads to the climactic moment in the third act where Toth's disabled wife wakes up screaming from pain in the middle of the night because she's disabled. She has osteoporosis. And so this is also a scene, by the way, that we see like 10 times of her waking in the middle of the night, screaming in pain. Because we got to get the point. She's disabled and in pain. You can't have one scene that tells you that. We need 15 scenes so that you understand that this woman is disabled and in pain. And finally, there's this scene, and Toth decides, because he's such a good husband, that the way to make his wife feel better is to give her intravenous heroin, which he does, and then has sex with his overdosing wife, who almost dies. And when she wakes up in the hospital, she tells her husband that she wants to move to Israel, because America is rotten. Quote, "The whole country is rotten," she says. And then she leaves. She goes home. Before going back to Israel, she then goes to the home of Van Buren to confront him for raping her husband. And Van Buren runs away and kills himself. At least that's implied. They never actually show it. But he goes and kills himself. And the end. Like, that's the end of the movie. There's a totally unnecessary epilogue scene, because unnecessary scenes could be the actual name of this movie. But the movie essentially ends with the homosexual Christian rapist millionaire committing suicide after he's confronted by the strong feminist wife of the Jewish heroin addict immigrant that he violated. Tax season's here again, and the IRS isn't messing around in 2025. Look, I get it. Tax problems are about as fun as a root canal. Maybe you've got some unfiled returns collecting dust, or you're sitting on a pile of back taxes that's giving you night sweats. And with April 15th breathing down your neck, it's tempting to just walk into the woods alone, never look back, and hope it all goes away. But here's the thing. Trying to ghost the IRS, well, that's like trying to outrun a bear. Spoiler alert, it does not end well. And that's why you should let Tax Network USA deal with this headache for you. These folks aren't your average tax people. They've got a direct line to the IRS. Apparently that's a thing, so they know exactly which agents to talk to. Whether you're in the hole for 10K or 10 mil, they've got tricks up their sleeves that actually work. They've already sorted out over $1 billion in tax debt, so they must be doing something right. Talk with one of their strategists today. It's free. Stop the threatening letters, stop looking over your shoulder, and protect yourself from property seizures and bank levies. Don't let the IRS control your future. Call 1-800-958-1000 or visit tnusa.com/Walsh. April 15th is just around the corner, so act now before the IRS acts first. So That's probably all you need to know about this movie. There are enough problems in what I've just described that I would think would convince you not to watch it. But there are plenty of other problems too. For one thing, and this is not a small issue, Toth is supposed to be a brilliant architect in the film. Like the whole point is that he was a brilliant architect. He came here, he can't get a job, he's shoveling coal, and then Van Buren discovers him and says, "Oh my gosh, look at your buildings, it's beautiful." Except that his buildings are monstrously hideous. They are these clunky, behemoth, unartful masses of concrete. And in a way, they're a good metaphor for the movie itself. And meanwhile, the main character, Toth, has essentially no redeeming qualities. He's a junkie and an adulterer who designs ugly buildings. Even worse, he gets raped by a man and still goes back to work for him. Doesn't have to, by the way. He's at this point, he actually, at this point in the film, he had gotten a job in New York, like just a steady, stable office job in New York. He could go back to that. He's not desperate and impoverished. He decides to go back and work for the guy who just raped him. And then he leaves it to his disabled wife to go confront the guy. Now, I'm not saying that movies have to have happy endings or that they have to always tell stories about saints and heroes. I have nothing against sad movies. I have nothing, in principle at least, against movies that focus on flawed people or even bad people. The Godfather is one of the greatest films of all time, after all. But if you want me to spend 3 hours, 3.5 hours with a character, if you want me to stay invested through something like 30 years of this character's lifespan, you have to give me some reason to care about him. And there is no reason to care about this character. There's a principle in screenwriting called save the cat. It's a phrase coined by Blake Snyder. And the idea is that in a film, you want your protagonist to do something generous or heroic in the first 10 or 15 minutes of the film in order to get the audience on his side and to make us care about what happens afterwards. And I think this is probably an overly simplistic rule. It's a formula that doesn't always hold up. But there's a general point which is true, that as the filmmaker, you need to give us as an audience a reason to care about this character. And The Brutalist does the opposite. It takes a kind of anti-save the cat approach. And in this film, the protagonist, in the very beginning, makes it to America without his wife. His wife is, as far as we know, still in a concentration camp. And the first thing he does is visit a prostitute. His wife is in a concentration camp, and his very first move is to have sex with a hooker. A scene that, like many other sex scenes in this movie, they show in long and gratuitous detail. And I have no idea why. I mean, this is, I don't know who gratuitous sex scenes in movies are for. I don't, every time I see it in a movie, and there's like 5 or 6 of them in this movie, who is this for? Why is this here? Anyone who wants to watch porn can find it anywhere else on the internet. Like, they don't need to sit through a 3.5-hour movie about a Holocaust survivor to see porn. They could unfortunately find it anywhere else. The rest of us would prefer not to have it interjected into the middle of a film for no reason. Okay, like, you want to have the guy visit a hooker. Story-wise, I don't think you should do that. I think all it accomplishes is it makes me hate this character, and then you're going to put this character through the ringer for the next 3.5 hours. I don't care about what happens to him after that, because he's a bad guy, so I just don't care that much. But if you want to do that, you can show the guy walk into the brothel and then walk out buttoning his pants up, and we get it. We can fill in the rest. We don't need to actually see the stuff that happens in between. No adult watching the movie is going to go, well, what happened in there? What was the meaning of that? What was that all about? Anyway, the bigger problem is that the character doesn't really grow or change in any way from this point. Another basic principle of filmmaking is that the main character has to undergo some kind of transformation. Some sort of change should happen. That's what a story is. Like a character goes through a change, both an internal emotional change and there should be some kind of, so there should be the internal journey and the physical journey. Both of those things should happen in a story. It's not a real story if we don't see that. And instead, Brody's character goes from sad to a lot sadder by the end. He's a pitiful figure in the beginning, and by the end, he's even more pitiful. Why do we need to see that? Why should we want to see that? Why does this movie exist? Why did the filmmaker feel the need to tell this story? None of that is clear by the end of the movie. I will say the performances in the film are quite impressive. They're good performances. It is a beautifully shot film, but the movie underneath is quite ugly. It is ugly and pointless and depressing and demoralizing just for the sake of it, for no reason other than just to be that way. And, I just asked why the film exists, and I think I answered the question. It exists in order to be ugly and pointless and depressing and demoralizing. And that's why a lot of films exist these days. And they usually win a bunch of awards, and people pretend to like them, but that doesn't change the fact that they are, at their core, simply bad films. And this is simply a bad film. And it is also, today, canceled. If you'd like to see what else I have to say, you can access my full show by going to dailywire.com or by going to the Matt Walsh Show Twitter page. Hope to see you there. Godspeed.